He believed she was merely the maid, someone meant to clean and be invisible. However, when he discovered her teaching his son to dance, his fury was immediate. Who gave her permission? He was ready to dismiss her on the spot, but then he uncovered the shocking truth about her past, and in that moment, his entire world flipped upside down. Elena Vasquez's fingers traced the edge of the gilt-framed mirror, gathering dust that only she would notice. During the 9 months she had spent at the Morgan estate, she had honed the skill of invisibility, moving silently with her eyes lowered, becoming part of the furniture. This was what Richard Morgan paid her for, to uphold perfection without being seen. The sprawling colonial mansion resonated with emptiness despite its grandeur. 12,000 square feet of imported marble, designer furniture, and not a single surface that felt lived in. Elena navigated the cavernous hallway, the soft padding of her shoes against the hardwood being the only sound in the tomb-like stillness. Richard Morgan's corner office door was always closed, blue light from multiple monitors seeping out. The tech millionaire had built his empire from nothing, a fact he frequently mentioned to guests but rarely stepped away from behind his screens. When he did acknowledge Elena, it was with the detached efficiency of someone addressing a particularly advanced kitchen appliance. A curt instruction, a nod. Never her name. Elena paused at the sound of faint music drifting from the library. Marcus should have been at his tutoring session, yet instead, she found the 10-year-old huddled in the window seat, his thin shoulders hunched protectively around a tablet. His dark eyes, so reminiscent of his mother's, darted up in alarm when the floorboard creaked beneath her foot. "I'm sorry, Miss Vasquez. I was just—" His finger frantically jabbed at the screen, but not before Elena caught sight of the familiar rhythm and movements of dancers performing the salsa cobra. "It's all right, Marcus," she said softly, setting down her cleaning supplies. The boy had spoken more words to her in that startled moment than he had in the past month since his mother's passing. Since that day 3 years ago, Marcus had retreated deeper into himself. The lively, chatty child from the photographs had disappeared, replaced by a silent shadow who flinched at sudden movements. Elena gestured toward the now silent tablet. "That dance, it's from Colombia, isn't it?" Marcus's eyes widened. "You know it." "Of course." A smile warmed Elena's face. "It's from my hometown. I used to dance it professionally." The boy's expression transformed with wonder. "Really? You were a real dancer?" Elena nodded, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. How long had it been since anyone had inquired about her past, about who she was before she became invisible? Marcus clutched the tablet. "We have this cultural showcase thing at school in 2 weeks. Mom was Colombian, so I thought maybe—" His voice trailed off. "The other kids already think I'm weird. They'll probably laugh." Elena saw her own uncertainty reflected in his, a feeling of being an outsider caught between two worlds. Without thinking, she extended her hand. "Would you like me to show you just one step?" The hesitation in Marcus's eyes shifted to tentative hope. "Could you? Just don't tell my dad. He doesn't like it when I talk about Mom's family." Elena demonstrated a basic step, muscle memory returning instantly. Marcus stood awkwardly, stiff with self-consciousness as he attempted to imitate her movement. His foot tangled with his opposite ankle, nearly sending him sprawling. Their eyes met in shared surprise. And then, a miracle. Marcus laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his serious face into a reflection of his mother. The heavy library door crashed open. Richard Morgan stood frozen in the doorway, his tailored suit sharp as the fury that instantly contorted his features. His gaze locked on Elena, still poised to guide his son's movements. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my son?" The temperature in the room plummeted with each precisely enunciated word. His eyes hardened as they shifted between Elena and Marcus, not just with anger, but with something deeper, something ugly. "Dad!" Elena was just... Marcus began, shrinking back. "Get your hands off my son now." Each syllable dripped with cold fury and unmistakable disgust, as if Elena's mere touch had contaminated the boy. "You're the help, nothing more. Marcus, go to your room. Now." Richard's command left no room for debate. The boy cast one desperate glance at Elena before slipping past his father, shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow. The instant the door closed behind Marcus, Richard advanced into the library, his calculated steps reminding Elena of a predator, each movement designed to intimidate. "I didn't hire you to teach my son your dances." He spat, the last word tasting foul in the air. "Your job is to clean this house, not influence my child with ideas that aren't suitable for someone of his background and future." Elena's hands clasped tightly at her waist, knuckles whitening. "I apologize, Mr. Morgan." Marcus was interested in his mother's. Richard cut her off, his voice dropping dangerously. "You don't get to invoke my wife. You don't know anything about our family." "Of course, sir." Elena maintained her neutral tone despite the humiliation burning her cheeks. "You people always think you can insert yourselves where you don't belong." Richard adjusted his already impeccable tie. "Just because we allow you into our homes doesn't mean you belong in our lives." "You people." Two words that instantly stripped away her individuality, her education, her history, reducing her to a stereotype in his mind. "It won't happen again," Elena managed, the professional mask she had honed over years slipping back into place despite the tremor in her hands. "See that it doesn't. I'm not running a charity here. There are 50 other women who would take your job in a heartbeat." He glanced pointedly at her cleaning supplies. "I believe you have work to do." That night, a folded piece of paper was found slipped beneath her door in the small servants' quarters at the edge of the property. Marcus's handwriting was careful, each letter formed with deliberate precision. "Please don't stop teaching me. I need to do this for Mom. I'm sorry about Dad. He gets angry when I talk about her." Elena pressed the note to her chest, torn between compassion for the boy and the need for self-preservation. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with her mother's medical bills and her own precarious immigration status. The following days unfolded under Richard's heightened scrutiny. He appeared unexpectedly during her cleaning routine, finding faults with previously acceptable work. The baseboards weren't thoroughly dusted. The silver wasn't polished to his standards. Each critique was delivered with the same cold contempt. "I don't understand why you keep the girl," Elena overheard Mrs. Reynolds say to Richard one afternoon. The elderly housekeeper had served the previous owners of the mansion for decades before the Morgans purchased it. "She clearly doesn't comprehend how things are done in a proper household." "She's cheap," Richard replied dismissively, "and until today, she knew her place." Later, Mrs. Reynolds found Elena in the laundry room, methodically folding sheets with hospital corners. "Don't take it personally, dear," the older woman said, her papery hands sorting through table linens. "When I started here 40 years ago, I wasn't even permitted to use the front door. I had to come through the service entrance, even in snowstorms. Mr. Morgan wasn't raised to see people like us as equals. His type never are." On Wednesday, Elena glimpsed Marcus being driven away in the family's sleek black SUV. His expression resigned. That evening he returned looking defeated. Dad hired Mr. Peters from the Academy of Dance. He whispered when he encountered Elena in the hallway. "He keeps saying I should stand like a gentleman and that I have no natural rhythm." 2 days later, Richard assembled the household staff in the kitchen. "I'm hosting an important business dinner next Friday," he announced. "Potential investors from Colombia for our new tech center in Bogota. Everything must be perfect." His gaze lingered pointedly on Elena. "I expect everyone to perform their duties flawlessly." As Elena arranged fresh flowers in the dining room the following day, Richard's voice carried from his office, where the door was slightly ajar. "Yes, I understand we need to humor them," he was saying into his phone. "But you know how these Latin American businessmen operate. Everything on island time. I just hope they understand the concept of showing up when scheduled." He laughed at his own joke. "Their technical capabilities look good on paper, but between you and me, I have serious doubts about their ability to deliver to our standards." Elena's fingers tightened around the stem of a lily, a thorn pricking her skin. The night before Richard's important dinner, Elena found Marcus huddled in the window seat of his bedroom, tears streaming silently down his face. "The showcase is in 3 days," he whispered. Mr. Peters says I should just read a poem instead. But Mom always said dancing tells stories words can't. Elena knelt beside him, her resolve crumbling at the sight of his pain. One more lesson, she whispered back. Tomorrow afternoon, when your father is at his meeting. But then we have to stop. Please, I can't, he pleaded. The boy nodded as hope flickered in his eyes. You need this job, but just once more, please. I have to do this for her. The living room had the best hardwood floor in the house. Smooth, expansive, perfect for dancing. Elena had pushed back the furniture to create a makeshift studio while Marcus practiced the basic three-step pattern of the salsa cobra. His movements were still hesitant, but they flowed better than before. His face contorted in concentration rather than anxiety. Remember to feel the music, not just count the steps, Elena encouraged, demonstrating the fluid hip motion that characterized the dance. Your mother always said dancing comes from here. She touched her heart. Not from here. She tapped her temple. Marcus's eyes widened. You really knew things about my mom that I don't. Again, from the beginning, Elena said gently. 1, 2, 3. The front door slammed with such force that the crystal chandelier trembled overhead. Richard Morgan stood in the entryway, his briefcase sliding from his fingers to land on the marble floor with a thud. His meeting had ended early. Catastrophically early. What the hell is this? His voice was deadly quiet, more terrifying than a shout. Marcus froze mid-step, the color draining from his face. Dad, I asked her to. Get upstairs now. Marcus's defiance shocked everyone in the room, including himself. You can't keep making Mom disappear. Richard flinched as if struck. This has nothing to do with your mother. It has everything to do with her. Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. Elena is teaching me the salsa cobra, the dance Mom loved for the cultural showcase because I want to remember her, even if you want to forget. Richard's gaze snapped to Elena, eyes narrowing to slits. You're fired, he snarled, stalking toward her. Pack your things and be gone by morning. Elena should have nodded, apologized, and retreated. This was the unwritten rule of survival in homes like this. But something in Marcus's desperate expression made her plant her feet firmly on the polished hardwood. Mr. Morgan, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Your son wants to connect with his mother's culture, the culture you've been attempting to erase since she died. You know nothing about my wife, Richard hissed. I know that Camila Garcia was born in Barranquilla, Elena said quietly. I know she started dancing at age 5. I know she had a scar on her left ankle from when she fell from her grandfather's mango tree. And I know she had a laugh that made everyone around her smile. Richard staggered back as if she had physically struck him. How could you possibly? Because I danced with her, Elena said, her hand slipping into her pocket and withdrawing a worn photograph protected in a plastic sleeve. For 6 years, we were in the same company. Marcus moved closer, transfixed by the photograph Elena held out. 2 young women in elaborate traditional costumes, arms around each other's waists, faces alight with joy. One was unmistakably Elena, perhaps 10 years younger. The other, Mom, Marcus whispered, reverently touching the image. Richard snatched the photo, his hands trembling. This is impossible, he exclaimed, staring at the image of his late wife, younger than he had ever known her, radiant in a costume he had never seen. Camila was my best friend. Elena's voice softened with memory. She was the star of our company, destined for international stages. Then she met you during your business trip to Colombia, and she chose love over dance. A sad smile brushed her lips. I didn't understand her choice then. You're the Elena. Richard's voice lost its commanding edge, the one she had heard during labor with Marcus, because he had been stuck in Tokyo. Elena nodded. After the accident, after I could no longer dance professionally, I lost everything. My career, my visa sponsorship. Camila always said there would be a place for me here. But she died 3 years ago, Richard said, the accusation hollow. Why now? It took me that long to finally reach out, Elena admitted. I needed the work, yes, But I also came because of a promise. She looked at Marcus, who was watching this exchange with stunned fascination. Camila made me swear that if anything happened to her, I would ensure Marcus knew where he came from, who he is. Richard sank onto the edge of the sofa, still clutching the photograph. Something shifted in his expression, the rigid control cracking to reveal raw grief underneath. You've been trying to erase her, Elena said softly. Not just her things, but her culture, her language. Half of who your son is. I wasn't, Richard began, then stopped. The denial died on his lips as he looked at his son, Camila's eyes staring back at him from a face becoming more like hers every day. I couldn't bear it, he whispered, the admission torn from a deep place. Every Spanish word, every Colombian tradition, it felt like losing her all over again. Marcus approached his father cautiously, as if Richard might shatter. But Dad, when I dance, I can feel her. It's like she's not really gone. In the heavy silence that followed, Elena watched as Richard Morgan confronted the truth of what he had been doing, not protecting his son from pain, but systematically amputating half of the boy's identity. In that moment, his entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, revealing him not as the powerful millionaire who commanded rooms but as a broken husband who had never learned how to grieve. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as Elena prepared coffee, her suitcase packed and waiting by the service entrance. Richard entered, impeccably dressed as always, but the confident posture had vanished. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. I've been thinking about our situation, he said, his tone businesslike despite the intimate subject matter. He slid an envelope across the counter. This should compensate you for any inconvenience. Elena didn't touch the envelope. I didn't come for your money, Mr. Morgan. Then what do you want? A flash of the old suspicion crossed his face. I told you yesterday, I came to keep a promise. Elena met his gaze steadily. Money can't fulfill that. Richard's jaw tightened. Even in vulnerability, his instinct was to reassert control, to reduce complicated emotions to simple transactions. The business dinner is tonight, he said finally. We'll discuss your position here afterward. That evening, Elena moved efficiently through the dining room in her uniform, serving plates of catered Colombian cuisine to Richard's guests, 5 executives from Bogotá, potential investors in his company's South American expansion. This ajiaco is almost authentic, remarked one of the executives, a silver-haired man named Alejandro Reyes. Almost, but not quite. He stopped mid-sentence as Elena placed a glass of water before him. Dios mío! Elena Vasquez. Elena froze, recognition dawning simultaneously. It is you, the principal dancer from the Barilla Ballet Folklorico. Alejandro beamed, switching to rapid Spanish. My wife and I saw you perform in 2010. Your interpretation of the cumbia was magnificent. The table fell silent as the other executives recognized her name. From his position at the head of the table, Richard watched the exchange with undisguised shock. You never mentioned your maid was Elena Vasquez, Alejandro said to Richard, clearly impressed. A cultural treasure of Colombia working in your home. Throughout dinner, Elena found herself drawn into conversation with the visitors, discussing dance, music, and shared connections to Barranquilla. Richard observed from across the room as she conversed easily with his guests in Spanish, their faces lighting up in a way his rehearsed corporate small talk never achieved. He saw her laughing, gesturing expressively, a completely different woman from the silent figure who had moved invisibly through his house for months. After the guests departed, Richard found Elena in the kitchen, removing her serving apron. They were impressed by you, he said, a hesitant tone in his voice. They were kind, Elena replied. A heavy silence settled between them, filled with unspoken negotiations. Finally, Richard spoke. I can't bring Camila back, he said, the words seeming to physically pain him. And I can't undo how I've treated you. No, you can't, Elena agreed. Richard looked down at his hands, capable of building a tech empire but helpless to rebuild what mattered most. But Marcus needs to know his mother's culture, and he paused, I need to know who she really was. They reached an uneasy arrangement. Elena would remain, not just as household staff but as Marcus's dance teacher and cultural guide. Richard reluctantly agreed to begin therapy to address his grief and prejudices, a process that would be slow and difficult. 3 days later, Marcus performed the salsa cobra at his school showcase. His movements weren't perfect. His timing occasionally faltered, but the joy on his face spoke volumes. In the audience, Richard sat stiffly beside Elena, his discomfort evident but his presence unwavering. He has her smile when he dances, Richard whispered, his voice thick with emotion. 1 week later, Richard discovered Elena and Marcus in the boys' room, arranging a small collection of candles, marigolds, and photographs on a decorated table. "What's this?" he asked, tension immediately tightening his shoulders. "It's an altar," Marcus explained eagerly, "for Day of the Dead. Mom used to make one every year. Remember?" Richard's face clouded, his instinct to object visible. But he stopped himself, watching as Marcus carefully placed a photo of Camila at the center of the display. "It's to honor and remember those we've lost," Elena explained gently, "to keep their memory alive." Richard approached slowly, as if navigating unfamiliar territory. His fingers brushed the frame of Camila's photograph, the professional headshot he kept in his office, not the candid image of her laughing that Elena had provided. For a moment, everyone held their breath. "Will you tell me about the dances my mom used to do?" Richard asked Elena quietly, still looking at the photograph. It was a small step, but a significant one. Later that evening, Elena stood by the window of her small room, looking out at the manicured gardens of the Morgan estate. Her reflection stared back, not invisible, but not yet fully seen. She thought of Camila, of promises kept, and journeys just beginning. "We carry our history in our bodies," she whispered to the unseen audience beyond the glass. "In the way we move through the world. Some try to erase it, others fight to preserve it. But the dance goes on, generation after generation." Her gaze shifted to the main house, where light still burned in Richard's office window. "The question is, whose steps will you choose to follow?"